Hello everybody. Today I'm going to show you how to really make a delicious cauliflower cheese, and I'm going to start out by talking you through the ingredients that we have. This is 50 grams of unsalted butter. Now I'm going to stop now to say that it's really important to measure everything exactly as you can. I use the scales and I think that's a really good idea. So 50 grams of unsalted butter, and then we've got 25 grams of plain flour. We've got 300 milliliters of milk, and again I use my scales to weigh the milk because these plastic jugs aren't always as accurate as they could be. This is a half of a teaspoon of salt, and this is a teaspoon of English mustard powder. Now if you don't have that, you could probably use a teaspoon of mustard from a jar, but I think this is a really good thing to do, and it adds a really nice tangy taste to the food. This is 100 grams of grated cheese. The original recipe calls for Lancashire cheese, but I had some cheddar cheese in my freezer already grated, so I used that instead. I think you could use any kind of strong, sharp cheese like cheddar or Lancashire cheese. Now of course you can't make cauliflower cheese without cauliflower. If you can't find cauliflower at the moment, you could use broccoli, or you could even make a macaroni and cheese pretty much similar to this recipe. And then the last thing is some breadcrumbs. This is 30 grams of breadcrumbs, and I never buy breadcrumbs already made. What I did is I took a piece of bread, and it's a good idea to take that end piece of the loaf that nobody ever wants to eat, and then I just blitzed it up in the food processor and made breadcrumbs. So that's going to go on at the very end. Alright, before we do anything else, I'm going to show you how to prepare the cauliflower. So I've already taken off the outside leaves of this cauliflower. It came wrapped in leaves, and that's a really nice protection that nature provides anyway. If you've got anything like these leaves here, you can get rid of those. It's a good idea. You can just cut like this and get rid of that end bit. And I've got my little rubbish bowl here, which is my trusty friend, so that's where I'm putting everything offside. I like to cut the cauliflower in half like this, and then you can just break the pieces off. I think this is really important. A lot of people don't use this bit, but what I like to do is to, when you're preparing it, you could cut it like this, and then if you've got the stalk, you can cut that where it's like this, and that helps it to cook a bit faster. I think that piece is probably a bit bigger than I want, so I'm just going to cut it, and I'm going to put the pieces in the bowl. Now, an important thing to do is to try to make all of your pieces of cauliflower about the same size. So you don't want a really enormous piece of cauliflower along with little bitty pieces, because then they'll cook at all different temperatures, and all different, not temperatures, they will cook at all different times. The big pieces will be undercooked and the little pieces will be overcooked, and you want to be a bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears and be just right. So there is my cauliflower all cut up. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to move over to the stove magically like this. So here's the stove top. I'm going to turn on the heat. One thing I forgot to say, at the start of the recipe, the very beginning, you want to turn your oven on. And the oven temperature is 220 degrees Celsius, or if you've got gas oven, it's gas mark 7. If you've got a fan oven, it's 200 degrees Celsius. So like any recipe, when you start cooking, you want to turn your oven on right away to get it heating so that it'll be the right temperature when it's time to cook. Now I've got my butter here. Very difficult to see in this video, but there is butter in there. It looks a bit ghostly. And I'm going to add it to the pan, and it will start melting. So I've got a wooden spoon here to give it a bit of a stir and help it going. And what you're going to do next is you're going to add the flour, which again looks ghostly, but when it gets added in it will be fine, and then you'll stir it up. Now when I stir this stuff, after it gets melted, I use a whisk like this one, and I've got non-stick pans, so this is a whisk that's coated with a sort of rubbery like Teflon coating, but you could also use a wooden spoon or a spatula, whatever you use at home. I use this because it doesn't scratch the bottom of the tin. Right, this butter is almost melted, So what I'm going to do is to add the flour to it, just a little bit at a time, and stir with my whisk. And it's okay if you start getting lumps at the beginning, you can usually stir those out. You can always stir those out, really. So, adding the flour to it, and it smells delicious. When you're making this at home, this is the bit that it will start smelling like shortbread biscuits or something, because it's the same ingredients. So what I'm going to do now is to give this butter and flour a stir. And what you've made here is called a roux. It's spelled R-O-U-X, French word. It's sort of like a paste, and what the recipes always say to do with the roux is to cook it until it starts smelling biscuity or nutty. So if you imagine that you've got shortbread biscuits in the oven and they're cooking, and you walk into the kitchen, it smells delicious, that's the smell that you're after. Now what I'm going to do, I've got my milk here, another ghostly ingredient, and I'm going to pour the milk into this roux, just a little bit at a time. So pour a little bit and stir it, and it'll start sort of clumping together, but that's okay. So see, it's almost come together into a kind of dough, if you can see that. Still pour in a little bit of milk. If you need to, you can get somebody to help you do that. Somebody could stand 2 meters away from you, and they could pour in a little bit of milk, and then you do the stirring, and you get to take all the glory, because this is, if anything's tricky, this is the tricky bit, but it's not tricky. You can just tell your friends it's tricky. So I've added about half the milk now. Looks a bit like scrambled eggs. But what this is going to end up being is a delicious cheese sauce for our cauliflower cheese. Now I'm just going to let that sit for a tiny minute, and I'm going to add my cauliflower to some water that I've already got boiling. Before I do that, I'm going to add about a teaspoon, which one? Teaspoon of salt to that water, and put the cauliflower in and let it boil. And you don't want it to cook for too long. Go back to stirring my sauce, because you want it to have a bit of a bite, because it will continue to cook in the oven. So I'm adding more milk. Cauliflower's bubbling away. Cauliflower cooks for about 3 minutes. So I'm going to set my timer, and when my timer goes off, I'm then going to drain that cauliflower into a colander that I've got sitting in the sink already. And again, if you're making this recipe with somebody else, that would be a good job for that somebody else to do. They could drain the cauliflower while you keep making this delicious sauce. Now I'm going to turn the heat off that. If you've got a kitchen surface that stays hot, you can take it off. And what I'm actually going to do is to move back over here. So I'll move over to my chopping board, and I'm going to add the delicious things to this. So I'm going to add the salt, which is here. And I'm going to add, I'll give that a bit of a stir. I'm going to add the mustard powder. This may get a bit lumpy as well, but you just stir it in until you don't see the lumps anymore. And that gives it a really nice sort of golden color as well. And apart from the tangy taste that you get, it helps to add a bit of the color. Now this is really important. This is what sometimes catches people out. The recipe says to add half the cheese now, and sometimes people don't read that and they add all of the cheese, and then they get to the end of the recipe and it says add the remaining cheese, and they go, uh-oh, I haven't got any remaining cheese. Before I do that, my cauliflower's beeping, so I'm going to go back over here and get it, turn the timer off. You can't see this, but I promise what I'm doing is getting Mr. Cauliflower off like that, and I'm going to just drain it over there in my sink. So the cauliflower is draining, and what I was just saying is, you add half the amount of cheese that you've got. So this is about 50 grams of cheese, and add it to your sauce. Now I'm going to swap over to my wooden spoon, because I find when I stir this with the whisk, it sort of gets all caught up into the whisk and it clogs it up and it's difficult to get off. Ah, I wish you could smell that. That smells absolutely delicious. Now my recipe doesn't call for this, but I think this is something that I like to do anyway, and probably a lot of you do it as well. I'm going to add a bit of pepper to my sauce because I quite like pepper. You could wait until the end and then people could put pepper on it at the table if they like pepper, but I think that just adds a really nice dimension to the sauce. Another thing that you could add, if you've got some at home, is some nutmeg. Freshly grated nutmeg is really delicious, and it suits cheese sauce really, really well. So that's something that you can do if you've got that. Now, what I'm going to do is to put my baking dish here. Now, what I've done before, while you were all asleep, is I buttered my baking dish all the way around the sides and the bottom. And that is mainly so that the stuff doesn't stick to it, and then you end up with that horrible cleaning mess at the end, because it'll get nice and brown and bubbly, but the cheese and things will stick to the sides. So if you butter it, then that won't happen so much. And it also adds a bit of flavor to the recipe. Now what I'm going to do is to tip my cooked cauliflower in here. Now this only cooked for 3 minutes, remember? So it's not going to be really, really soft, and it shouldn't be. And then you just pour your delicious cheese sauce over the cauliflower, like this. I don't know if you can see this. That just looks like I don't know what, an advertisement on television for deliciousness. If you've got a spatula, you could use one of those rubber spatulas to go around the pan to get every last little bit off. I'm probably going to leave a bit in the pan that I can eat afterwards when this is in the oven. So I've mixed my cheese sauce into the cauliflower like that. Give it a little bit of stir around. It will sort of, as it cooks in the oven, it'll kind of mix up itself anyway. Now the next thing that you do is you're going to take the rest of the cheese, that 50 grams that you didn't use, and you're going to add the breadcrumbs. Remember those? And add the breadcrumbs to the cheese. Mix it around. My hands are incredibly clean because I washed them beforehand. So you've got a mixture of breadcrumbs and cheese, and what that does is it adds flavor, but it also adds texture, so we'll end up with a really crunchy topping. Now, I have learned this little trick from people on television. When you're sprinkling stuff on top, try to do it from high up. If I lift my hand too high, you can't see it. But if you do it right down next to the thing, you end up with a big clump of breadcrumbs all in one place. And what you want to do is have them scatter out evenly. So that's what I'm doing. I'll just add the rest of that, and that is ready to go. So I put my breadcrumbs on top, and what I'm going to do is now put this in the oven, and it cooks for, I'm just looking at my recipe now, which is off the camera. It cooks for about 30 minutes. But what I like to do is to look at it, check it after about 20 minutes, and just make sure that it's okay. If it's getting too dark on top, you could cover it with some foil and then keep it cooking. Or you could even cook it for most of the time, take it out, let it cool, and then you could reheat it the next day or later that evening to make it hot and bubbly. So this is about to go in the oven, and I'll show you what it looks like when it comes out. Well, I just want to show you something that they don't often show you on television and cooking programs. I've just taken that out of the oven. It's been in there for the amount of time the recipe calls for. It looks delicious, but I think that that could cook longer. It's quite pale. I would dig into that now, but I just think an extra 5 minutes will really make a difference. So look at the way it looks now, and then I'm going to put it back in the oven and bring it back, and I'll show you the difference. Cauliflower cheese back in the oven for another 7 minutes, and I think that looks delicious. So it's a lot more golden and very crispy on the top. and bubbly, bubbly, bubbly hot, so be very careful with it, and very cheesy. Another thing that I did in the 7 minutes that this was cooking a bit more, I put some plates on top of the oven to warm, because I think it's really nice to serve food that's hot or warm on warmed plates, because it keeps it warmer longer. So I hope that you'll make this recipe at home. I hope you make it time and time again, and do enjoy. Thank you. Till next time, bye.